We all remember the thrill of a perfect action sequence. The gunfire, the explosions, the hero charging forward against impossible odds. But what if the version you saw wasn't the real one? Behind every released action film lies another cut, another version that never made it out of the editing bay. And in some rare, unsettling cases, what the studio greenlit on paper was completely different from what they eventually forced onto the screen. Entire performances were dubbed over. Endings were built from discarded scenes. Political messages were erased. Whole timelines were shifted. Not during filming. After it. Imagine wrapping an intense shoot. Months of work in the can, only to have studio executives step in and say, "We're rewriting it. Without you." These aren't just deleted scenes. These are full-scale rewrites happening after the cameras stopped rolling in post-production rooms, far from the directors, far from the actors, and definitely far from the audience. The result? Movies that feel off. Characters whose lips don't match the words. Final acts that feel stitched together from spare parts. Narratives that start one way but end somewhere completely different. The audience senses something's wrong, but they don't know why. Until now. These are the films where the real plot was buried under executive decisions, where the original vision was chopped, dubbed, looped, flipped, or just thrown out entirely. You thought you knew these movies. You didn't. Let's uncover 15 action films that were rewritten behind closed doors after the final cut had already been called. Fact: شباك واحد. Diplomatic immunity. 1991. You've seen villains with icy voices before. But what if that voice wasn't theirs at all? Diplomatic Immunity was meant to be a gritty, low-budget political thriller with a standout antagonist played by the menacing Zaki Noy. On set, his performance was praised for its unpredictability and cold charisma. But by the time the film hit VHS shelves, something felt off. His lips moved, but the voice didn't match. His menace? Gone. Replaced with a dull, emotionless dub. Why? After principal photography wrapped, producers grew concerned that Noy's accent and vocal delivery wouldn't resonate with American audiences. So they made a drastic decision. Hire another actor to dub over every line without informing the original cast or even the director. The result was jarring. Noy's physical performance remained on screen, but his intensity vanished. What was once a layered portrayal of a psychotic diplomat now came off as cartoonishly flat. The dissonance was so sharp that even casual viewers noticed something strange without ever knowing why. It was a post-production betrayal that didn't just affect one actor, it dismantled the entire arc of the film's central conflict. But voice wasn't the only thing studios have secretly swapped in the cutting room. Fact: شبكة اثنان. Scanner Cop. 1994. In the gritty world of Scanner Cop, minds explode literally. But behind the splatter was a far more subtle explosion. A political one that never saw the light of day. Originally filmed as a sci-fi thriller with a clear critique of authoritarian power structures, Scanner Cop featured a storyline where the psychic abilities of cops were used to suppress dissent and manipulate public perception. The antagonist? A corrupt city council exploiting telepaths to stay in power. But when test audiences and, more importantly, distributors began raising concerns about anti-government themes, the studio panicked. Instead of ordering reshoots, they restructured the entire narrative in post-production. Scenes were rearranged, dialogue was redubbed, key exposition was stripped out. The result? The villain went from a political manipulator to a generic mad scientist. Most fans never knew the difference. But attentive viewers spotted inconsistencies, scenes that contradicted one another, motivations that vanished mid-film, and emotional beats that led nowhere. The message was neutered. The vision was sanitized. Ironically, the very system Scanner Cop tried to criticize ended up rewriting its message. But some films didn't just lose a theme, they lost their ending altogether. Fact: شبكة ثلاثة. Caged Fury. 1991. It ends in fire. A triumphant escape. Redemption. Or so it seems. Caged Fury was one of those low-budget, exploitation-style prison thrillers that quietly gained cult status. It promised a gritty climax rebellion in flames, guards overthrown, justice served. But what most viewers didn't realize is this. That ending wasn't part of the original script. It wasn't even shot for the ending. After production wrapped, test screenings revealed a problem. The original third act, where the protagonist died in a failed breakout, was deemed too dark for home video audiences. But the crew had already disbanded. Reshoots weren't an option, so the studio did something audacious. They salvaged unused footage from the first act, re-edited it out of order, added stock explosion inserts, and dubbed in voiceover narration to fake a victorious ending. If you watch closely, you'll notice recycled shots. A character running down the same hallway 3 times, smoke that appears before anything burns, expressions that don't match the context. The ending worked on the surface. But to those who'd seen the raw script or early cut, it was an unrecognizable Frankenstein of footage. In this case, the hero didn't just escape prison. The film itself escaped its own truth. But what happens when studios don't just change the visuals but rewrite the entire soundtrack? Fact, Shabaka Arba. Catch the Heat. Elf wa Tis'omia. Wa Seba wa Thamanun. You're watching a dance scene in Catch the Heat, and something's wrong. The rhythm is off. The voices don't match the lips. The atmosphere feels sterile. That's because the version you're watching was never meant to exist. Originally filmed as a gritty action-romance hybrid set against a backdrop of undercover drug enforcement, Catch the Heat was shot in English, with a funky, jazz-fusion soundtrack tailored for American audiences. But when international distributors reviewed the cut, they demanded something more globally appealing. The studio complied and rebuilt the film's entire audio layer from scratch. Every single line of dialogue was dubbed. The original soundtrack? Scrapped. Replaced with generic synth music, awkward ambient noise, and inconsistent voice acting. Even actor Tiana Alexandra's lines were looped by another voice actress, flattening her layered performance into a monotone echo. This wasn't a localization, this was an exorcism. The soul of the film was lifted out in post, replaced with a hollow shell that alienated both English-speaking and international viewers. Worse, the original audio mix is now considered lost media. Only the dubbed version remains widely available. Catch the Heat is a textbook example of what happens when a studio tries to retrofit a film for market needs after the creative work is done and ends up erasing the movie's very identity. But at least Catch the Heat stayed consistent in structure. The next film? It changed depending on where you watched it. Fact Shabak Khamsa, Shadow Chaser, Elf wa Tis'omia, wa Ithnan wa Tis'aun. In one version, the villain lives. In another, he dies. Welcome to Shadow Chaser, where your location decided your ending. Shot in South Africa and distributed in multiple regions under different titles, Shadow Chaser was envisioned as a tight, die-hard style sci-fi action flick. But after shooting wrapped, producers realized they had a problem. No 2 territories wanted the same tone, so they edited the film into 2 different versions, each with its own timeline and character arcs. In the US release, the protagonist survives by outsmarting a rogue android in a nuclear facility. In the European cut, he dies, but takes the android down with him in a mutual destruction twist. Scenes were shuffled, music cues were altered. Even the villain's motivation changed depending on the market. Most viewers never noticed, assuming their version was the only one. But side by side, comparisons reveal glaring differences. Lines delivered in different orders, characters who live in one version but vanish in the other, entire subplots that exist in one timeline but not the next. The filmmakers had essentially built a choose-your-own-adventure from a single set of dailies without telling anyone. And while multiple cuts aren't new, Shadow Chaser didn't have a director's version or extended edition. It had regional realities, quietly tailored to please different cultures, each one altering the movie's DNA after filming had ended. But some rewrites weren't about global markets. They were about hiding something. Uncomfortable. Fact Shabaksta. Deadly Prey. Elf wa Tis'omia wa Seba wa Thamanun. A man is hunted in the woods by mercenaries. Classic setup. But the final product of Deadly Prey is missing something important. Its original villain. This low-budget cult classic was shot fast and loose in Southern California, with a raw energy that gave it its charm. The original cut featured a twisted commander orchestrating the manhunt not just as a sadist, but as a disgraced military officer covering up war crimes. His backstory was explored in flashbacks, painting a more complex portrait of evil. But after editing began, the producers had second thoughts. They feared the anti-military undertones might limit the film's distribution, especially during a patriotic media climate in the late 80 seconds. So they did the unthinkable. They cut the villain's origin story entirely. Whole scenes were excised. Dialogue was dubbed over. The commander became just another generic bad guy barking orders in the jungle. The nuance? Gone. The flashbacks? Burned. Even the actor's performance suffered, with long stretches of screen time awkwardly cropped or silenced. The result was a movie that felt stripped of its teeth. The danger was still there, but the moral ambiguity, the character depth, the questions it raised, erased in favor of simplicity. Deadly Prey still gained cult status, but few fans know they've only seen half the character that was originally filmed. And that wouldn't be the last time a film's political message got buried deep beneath the edit. Fact. T. American Ninja. San. Blood Hunt. Itch 2 Body Zero. It was supposed to be the franchise's boldest move, introducing a new hero, a darker tone, and a more sinister plot. But what ended up on screen was not the movie that was shot. American Ninja 3. Blood Hunt started out with an ambitious script, an exploration of bioweapon testing, government betrayal, and a reluctant ninja recruited into a fight he didn't choose. Actor David Bradley was brought in to replace Michael Dudikoff, and early dailies showed a brooding, reluctant warrior story. But the studio had other plans. After the film wrapped, executives decided the tone was too serious and demanded the editors reframe it as a fast-paced, action-first adventure. Subplots were gutted. Entire character arcs were removed. The protagonist's inner conflict, his trauma and resistance to violence, was almost entirely excised. To bridge the gaps, voiceovers were added to explain missing logic, and scenes were rearranged to emphasize fight choreography over narrative. What was meant to be a gritty, near-political martial arts thriller became a cartoonish, disjointed action flick. The emotional center was gone. To this day, no full copy of the original cut has surfaced. Fans who've seen early test reels note the stark contrast. A film about identity and conflict turned into just another kick-punch explosion fest. And American Ninja 3 isn't alone. Sometimes, the rewrites come from panic, not from purpose. Fact. شبك ثمانية. Cyborg Cop E. 1994. There's a line in Cyborg Cop 2 that sounds like it was made for memes. He's not just a machine, he's an idea. But that line? It was never in the original script. When Cyborg Cop 2 wrapped filming, the studio reviewed the footage and had one reaction. It wasn't exciting enough. The action worked, but the plot felt thin. Instead of ordering reshoots, they opted for a creative patchwork in post, injecting pseudo-philosophical lines, rearranging scenes, and overlaying dramatic narration. The result was a Frankenstein's monster of tone. Half the film plays like a straightforward cyborg killer romp. The other half tries and fails to channel Blade Runner-esque musings on identity and machine morality. The edits were so rushed that in one scene, the cyborg appears in two places at once because no one caught the timeline break caused by shuffled sequences. What's worse, some dialogue was AI looped, using early text-to-speech software, creating moments where voices flatten unnaturally mid-sentence. No explanation was given. No director spoke up. It was as if the final cut was assembled by a machine. Fitting, perhaps. The movie's legacy is confused. Critics dismissed it. Fans watch it for the action. But buried deep inside is the skeleton of a smarter film, one that never made it past the edit bay. But what happens when a film is rewritten not to fix it, but to erase something no one wanted to admit? Fact. شبك تسعة. Black Eagle. 1988. It's remembered today as a Jean-Claude Van Damme vehicle. But originally, Black Eagle was supposed to be a very different movie, with a very different star. The film began as a Cold War espionage drama focused on Ken Taney, a Japanese-American spy played by Sho Kosugi. The early script explored dual loyalties, family legacy, and cultural identity. Van Damme's character was just a secondary antagonist, a silent Soviet operative meant to reflect the faceless nature of war. But after the shoot wrapped and Van Damme's breakout success in Bloodsport exploded, the studio saw dollar signs. In a bold post-production shift, they re-edited the film to push Van Damme front and center. Fight scenes with him were extended, even spliced with unrelated footage to create new moments. Kosugi's dramatic beats were trimmed down, and the film's contemplative tone was buried beneath kicks, flips, and slow-motion evil glares. To make it worse, the new structure broke continuity. Van Damme appears in places he couldn't logically reach. His motivations are never explained. The espionage thriller became an accidental action showcase serving a marketing need, not the story. Kosugi later admitted he barely recognized the final cut. What had been a thoughtful spy drama became a vehicle for a rising star who wasn't even meant to carry the film. Sometimes, post-production doesn't just alter structure, it rewrites who the story was about. Fact, Shabakwa Hitsofur. The Hard Way. Elf, Watis'amia, Wates'a, Wathamanun. Imagine watching a film where every character seems slightly too calm. That's because the rage was cut, literally. The Hard Way, a little-known Canadian action film, originally pushed the boundaries of violence and emotional intensity. It starred Patrick McGoohan as a former hitman hunted by the system that created him. The shoot was known for its raw performances, shouting matches, breakdowns, scenes where actors lost themselves in character. It was meant to be gritty, psychological, and relentless. But after filming, test audiences responded poorly to the film's tone. Feedback cards called it too intense, overwhelming, and uncomfortable. Rather than release it as is, the studio made sweeping edits in post-production. What followed was a systematic softening. Yelling was trimmed, silences were padded in, scenes with emotional breakdowns were shortened, and whole confrontations were looped with calmer dialogue. The emotional crescendo of the third act, a screaming match turned gunfight, was replaced with a muted negotiation, leaving critics confused by the sudden tone shift. The final product felt sedated. The story still made sense, but the fire was gone. And the audience never knew that somewhere in a vault exists a version where everyone screams, bleeds, and breaks down for real. But not every rewrite dulls emotion. Some sharpen it into something much darker. Fact, Hasonon. Executive target, 1,997. What if the hero wasn't supposed to survive? Executive target, a direct-to-video explosion fest, told the story of a stunt driver blackmailed into kidnapping the president. It's remembered for car chases and B-movie bravado. But the original script ended very differently with the protagonist's death. In the version that was shot, the stunt driver chooses to sacrifice himself, driving a rigged limousine off a bridge to stop the bad guys. The scene was emotional, slow, and deliberately tragic, positioning the character as a fallen martyr. The stunt was real. The shot was perfect. But once the studio reviewed the footage, they changed course. Test viewers didn't like seeing the hero die. So producers ordered a new ending cut from earlier footage, inserting an ambiguous explosion and reusing reaction shots to fake a happy twist. To bridge the gap, they added voiceover. Somehow, he made it. But the physics didn't match. Neither did the emotion. The shift was so abrupt that fans assumed there was a sequel in the works. There wasn't. The rewrite created a false hope and undermined the film's most powerful moment, all to satisfy an outdated heroes don't die cliché. But sometimes, rewrites don't save the hero or the villain, they save the studio's ego. Fact Shabak Wahdathnan. Future Zone. Elif Watis'amia Watis'un. Time travel is confusing enough. Now imagine your own film gets lost in time thanks to editing. Future Zone. The sequel to Future Force starred David Carradine as a grizzled law enforcer who meets his son from the future. The story was meant to explore fatalism, legacy, and the cost of changing destiny. The script played with non-linear timelines, with characters appearing in multiple versions of the same event until a final twist revealed it was all a loop. But the studio panicked. They believed audiences wouldn't follow the time jumps. So after shooting wrapped, editors were instructed to rearrange the story into a linear sequence. Scenes meant to be reveals were placed up front. Tension was broken. The aha moment at the end became obvious by minute 20. Worse, narration was added to explain what was already clear, visually turning mystery into monologue. Critics called it insulting and unnecessarily dumbed down. Carradine, known for his patience, reportedly walked out of a screening in silence. The twist, once brilliant, landed flat. And all because the studio feared the audience wouldn't keep up. But what happens when an actor's performance is so raw, so chaotic? The studio rewrites the entire tone to cover it up. Fact, Shabak Wahdu Thalatha. Stone Cold. Elf, Watis'umia. Wawahid, Watis'un. Brian Bosworth wasn't just trying to act tough, he was tough. But the studio wasn't ready for what that looked like. Stone Cold was an ultra-violent biker gang infiltration thriller designed as a breakout vehicle for ex-football star Bosworth. During filming, he pushed himself hard, performing stunts, improvising lines, and delivering unexpectedly raw performances. The original cut reflected that intensity gritty, chaotic, and almost documentary-like in its portrayal of gang life. But producers got nervous. Bosworth's performance was too unpredictable, too unpolished, and not in line with the clean-cut hero image they wanted to sell. So in post-production, they reshaped the entire film around him. Scenes showing emotional vulnerability were cut. Dialogue was relooped to sound more stoic. Even his voice was deepened artificially in certain scenes. Moments where his character hesitated, showing trauma or doubt, were removed to make him appear more traditionally alpha. The result was a visually loud film with a strangely muted lead. Bosworth looked the part but emotionally felt like a ghost in his own movie. Fans expecting a full-throttle character study got a shell of one. Somewhere out there, there's a version of Stone Cold where Bosworth took a real risk. We never got to see it, but at least his face stayed on screen. In the next film, a character was erased entirely after being fully filmed. Fact: Shabak Wahida Arba'a. Red Scorpion Ithnan. Elif wa tis'ami'a wa arba'a wa tis'un. You'd never guess it watching the final cut, but Red Scorpion 2 was supposed to have two villains. In the original script and principal photography, the story followed a split-threat structure. An extremist militia leader and his mysterious handler, both representing different kinds of ideological madness. The handler, played by a now-forgotten TV actor, had over 20 minutes of screen time and a reveal in the third act that reframed the entire plot. But during test screenings, audiences reacted poorly to the slower, more cerebral scenes with the handler. The studio panicked. Instead of reshoots, they cut the character out, entirely rearranging the plot to make the militia leader the sole villain. Action scenes were stitched back to back. Dialogue that referenced the handler was overdubbed with vague exposition, but it didn't quite work. If you watch closely, you'll see moments where characters respond to things no one said. Shots linger on empty space. A reveal feels like it's building to nothing. It's not just a pacing problem. It's a ghost character haunting a film that pretends he was never there. The film was streamlined, yes. But in losing that character, it also lost its twist, its mystery, and its punch. Then again, some films don't get rewritten to remove characters. They get rewritten to protect legacies. Fact: Shabak Wahdakhmase. The President's Man. Alpha. When Chuck Norris is involved, things get delicate. The President's Man was a made-for-TV action flick produced by Norris and intended to launch his son into stardom. The original script, shot in full, featured an aging operative, played by Chuck, reluctantly training a reckless protege only to die in the third act, passing the torch. That's how it was filmed. Norris gave a surprisingly reflective performance, showing vulnerability, age, even fear. His death scene was dramatic, grounded, and emotionally resonant, shot in a single take. But after reviewing the cut, Norris himself reportedly objected. He felt the story sent the wrong message to his audience and asked for the ending to be changed in post. Without reshoots, the team repurposed footage, changed the score, and added voiceover explaining that his character had escaped off-screen. The new ending contradicted earlier plot points and felt tacked on. But for many viewers, it didn't matter. The Chuck Norris mythos demanded invincibility, and the studio complied. What was supposed to be a passing of the torch moment became a strange non-ending. The protege's arc flatlined. The emotional climax evaporated. Sometimes, rewrites aren't about making the story better. They're about preserving an image. But one last film took all these studio manipulations and turned them into something stranger than fiction. Bonus fact: the lost version of Point of No Return, Chungubeku. This one didn't make the top 15, but it might just be the strangest of all. Point of No Return, the American remake of La Femme Nikita, was already a controversial project. Critics feared it would dilute the intensity of the original. But few know that the first cut of the film, shot under the working title The Specialist, was almost completely different from what audiences eventually saw. The early version leaned far more into psychological tension. Bridget Fonda's character was unstable, more haunted, and less polished. The original third act didn't have a triumphant redemption. It ended in ambiguity, with her disappearing into a crowd after a failed mission, mentally shattered. But Warner Brothers rejected the cut outright. They believed the ending would alienate mainstream viewers and demanded a complete emotional rewrite. The director was sidelined in post. Scenes were restructured, new footage was shot, and the score was swapped for something lighter, more heroic. The final release turned her into a cleaner action heroine, stylish, composed, almost sanitized. Gone was the rawness. Gone was the emotional decay. The only trace of that original version? A single promotional still showing her crying in a scene that never appeared in the film. The original cut has never been released. No bootlegs, no leaks, nothing. It's not just a lost ending, it's a lost identity. And maybe that's the truest rewrite of all. Bonus fact. The lost version of Point of No Return. 천구백구십삼. This one didn't make the top 15, but it might just be the strangest of all. Point of No Return, the American remake of La Femme Nikita, was already a controversial project. Critics feared it would dilute the intensity of the original. But few know that the first cut of the film, shot under the working title, The Specialist, was almost completely different from what audiences eventually saw. The early version leaned far more into psychological tension. Bridget Fonda's character was unstable, more haunted, and less polished. The original third act didn't have a triumphant redemption, it ended in ambiguity, with her disappearing into a crowd after a failed mission, mentally shattered. But Warner Brothers rejected the cut outright. They believed the ending would alienate mainstream viewers and demanded a complete emotional rewrite. The director was sidelined in post. Scenes were restructured, new footage was shot, and the score was swapped for something lighter, more heroic. The final release turned her into a cleaner action heroine, stylish, composed, almost sanitized. Gone was the rawness. Gone was the emotional decay. The only trace of that original version? A single promotional still showing her crying in a scene that never appeared in the film. The original cut has never been released. No bootlegs, no leaks, nothing. It's not just a lost ending, it's a lost identity. And maybe that's the truest rewrite of all.